Hello everybody and welcome to The View from the Top. Hi to Ray, who's coming in from sunny Vancouver. Always good to get the weather forecast. To Raider, who's coming in from the Carolinas and looking forward to hearing the immigration updates on South Africa. We've also got an update on equity and mobility with Vialto Partners. And of course, it is Pride Month and we're going to be talking about diversity. And I'm super delighted that we have on the show with us today the wonderful Suzie Chapman from FN Global, who's a real champion of diversity and a real ally to everything diversity. So we're going to be talking to her later on in the show. We've got a wonderful, wonderful show for you today. You know how it works, everybody. Please join in the conversation. I can see some of you are doing so already. Tell us who you are, where you are. I'll be honest. The reason we want you to tell us who you are and where you are is because it's how we know you're there and it's how the others in the audience know that you're there. We're trying to share the community. We're trying to share the love in our industry. So please tell us if you're out there so that we know who's out there. So as I said, we've got an amazing show for you today, but also, howdy I see to Mark Rabe, to Aaron. So people coming from literally all over the world, which is just great. Now, if you want your credits, if you want your HRCI credits or your SHRM credits, they're up there. And many thanks to our friends at Rocket Mortgage who've helped us get the HRCI and the SHRM credits. And of course, if you want your CPE credits from Worldwide ERC, the GMS credits or the CRP credits, then again, it's there. So I'll leave it up there for a minute. But if you want those credits, then just either write down the number or screenshot it or take your camera out and take a photo of it. But one way or another, if you need those codes, we're going to leave it up there for you. So people are coming all over the world now. We've got nearly 100 people in the audience already. Now, let me just tell you about next week. We've got a fabulous show this week, all about diversity. Next week, we're talking about a completely different subject. And I'm going to leave you with a question, actually. Next week, we're going to be talking about what we've called Brave New World. We're going to be talking about mobility and data security in the 21st century. So the question I want to ask you next week or for next week is this, okay? You're moving somebody from one country to another. Let's say you're moving them from Singapore to India, okay? How many people do you think have access to the personal information of the person that you're moving? 5, 10, 15, 20, more? Put your thoughts in here. I'm not going to tell you the answer. I'm going to reveal the answer next week. But start thinking about that. If you're moving somebody, how many people do you think potentially have got access to their personal information? Okay. And that's the theme of next week's show. We're going to be talking all about data security in the 21st century. Okay. Really, really important subjects. That's one for you to think about for next week. Anyway, getting back to this week, okay, we always try to share a little bit of breaking news. What's been going on in the wonderful world of global mobility over the last 7 days? Well, let's have a look. This is all our latest breaking news from our wonderful industry. So congratulations to everyone who's been promoted, everyone who's moved job. I know there's people out there who are looking for work at the moment, and there's actually quite a lot of jobs out there too. So please, chin up, and we will try and help everybody find jobs, whatever we can do to help. And there are lots of jobs out there, and we listed some of those. I know our guest later on, Suzie Chapman, is herself hiring for a job. So again, we can actually ask her to tell us a bit about that job too. So we're really going to do our best to help people find new positions wherever possible. But we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about immigration. And I'm delighted that we have with us, as ever, the wonderful Julia Onslow Cole. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's welcome to our virtual stage, Julia Onslow Cole.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, how are you doing, Julia?
Very well, thanks.
Good. And where in the world are you today?
I'm in London. I'm in our London office today.
Okay, right. So they're very fortunate to have you, but it's not London you're going to be talking about today, is it? You're going to be talking about
South Africa.
South Africa.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to say that I have traveled to quite a few places, but I must say that I remember in about 1990 going to South Africa for the very first time and telling everyone I was going to visit Cape Town, and they said this is the most beautiful place that you'll ever visit in the whole world. And I thought that, and I still think that. I love Africa, and I think South Africa is particularly wonderful. So I wanted to say thank you so much to Lunga Mani, who heads our South Africa office, and also all his colleagues there. So South Africa is politically stable, but it's been going through a really, really hard time. And inflation is very high. It's about 6.8%. Unemployment for the first quarter was about 33%. And the really difficult thing is that youth unemployment is also a huge percentage of that. So there's serious economic challenges and social challenges, and that South Africa has been really hit by global food and fuel price increases. And so it means that a lot of consumers in South Africa are really facing these increased costs, which means that they're also reluctant to spend, which is also worsening the economy. And in addition to all of this, there's an unprecedented energy crisis where there's frequent power outages. And obviously this has a really poor impact on the government, on businesses, and obviously it impacts inward investment. So it's this really toxic mix of very high unemployment, low business confidence, low domestic demand. And in addition, for exports, there's also a lot of logistic challenges. On a more positive note, about 2 weeks ago, the South African farmers struck a deal with China, and now they're going to export maize to China. So that's a really positive note, and that will really boost the economy. So turning to immigration and what's happening on immigration in South Africa, after the pandemic, there were massive crises, as there were in all the consulates around the world. And so what happened is the South African government really focused on the under-resourcing in its consulates, and they sent people to help in their missions to actually take in applications. And that's eased the delays in the consulates when you make the applications overseas. But unfortunately, the backlog in country is huge. So there's over 50,000 visa applications which are undecided. And one of the reasons that there is such a backlog was that the government decided to centralize decision-making in Pretoria. So every application that's filed overseas has to go into Pretoria, and really there's just not enough manpower to handle this. So very rightly, businesses have been complaining and saying, well, this is really unacceptable and it's a deterrent on investment. And as a response to the crisis, the president announced a few developments. So these are kind of fresh off the block. And the most important of them is the Trusted Employer Scheme. Now, in essence, if you are an employer and you meet certain criteria and you qualify for this scheme, then a lot of these processes, these central processes, are going to be waived. And at the moment, they're running a pilot. They're getting 100 companies together. So the criteria is that there has to be a commitment from the company to invest. They have to have more than 500 employees, 60% of which should be South African. They must have a turnover of more than 34 million rands. And the investment that they are saying they're going to put into South Africa has to be in a sector of national importance, which is mining, construction, manufacturing. And also they have to show a skills transfer plan so that they can upskill South African employees. And in addition to this, we know that the government's about to announce some other really good communications in the next few weeks. And these we believe, but we're going to announce them, will include startup visas, remote working visas, and something for entrepreneurs. Now, the final thing I wanted to say is that there are 8 African countries between now and the end of the year that are having general elections. So this includes the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Libya, Madagascar, Somalia, Sudan, and Zimbabwe. And as you know, in Africa, some countries do show great instability before elections. And so what happens when you're coming up to an election, particularly in a country which is not quite as politically stable, companies often move resources and they move them strategically out of those locations somewhere else. And we're particularly highlighting the DRC, Zimbabwe, and Sudan. So we're doing a lot of strategic advice in Africa at the moment about where to put people and how to move them, and the timelines on this, and also on crisis management. So I think that's something that if I could just leave you with for Africa, if you have lots of employees in Africa, do consider this trusted employer scheme. Look out for new developments. And if you have employees in other countries, but particularly those that are having a general election and the ones I've highlighted, just think about whether you need to move anyone. And given all these delays everywhere across Africa, whether you should be thinking about it now.
Okay, really, really helpful. And the delays that we're talking about, how long? I know you talked about 50,000 backlog, but in terms of months, how long is the delay tending to work?
2 or 3 months or more.
Okay, so it's big delays. Okay,
yeah.
Julia, as ever, that's been absolutely wonderful. We're going to move on to talk about tax, but thank you so much for that immigration update. So everybody, you know how it works. Okay, as we say goodbye to Julia and we welcome to the stage Julie Barron from Vialto and her colleague Amy Lynn Flood from Vialto. Please, everybody, let's welcome them in the time-honored fashion of applause. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. Let's say cheerio and thank you to Julie Onslow-Cole, and welcome to our stage Julie Barron and Amy Lynn Flood. Hey Julie, welcome to the show again, and you brought a friend.
I did. I brought my good friend Amy Lynn today. Yeah, so Amy Lynn is one of my colleagues who works in specializes in equity compensation and executive compensation issues. So she's going to talk to us about a recent survey and some trends in the equity world and mobility.
Okay, Amy Lynn, the stage is yours. Tell us about equity and mobility.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Julie, for having me today. So we have been partnering with the Global Equity Organization. If you haven't heard of them before, they're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of equity-based employee compensation. And so this was the first year that we partner with them on their global equity incentive surveys. And the reason we did it is because we wanted to ensure that we could answer the question that we always get from our clients. What are other companies doing in my space? And so this survey just came out, the executive summary, about 200 companies over 20 company headquarters. So truly one of the only global surveys that touches in this area. And so I thought it'd be good to share with you some of the information we came out of this survey. The first one, which is good for me, is that eligibility and participation in long-term incentive plans like equity compensation continues to rise. We're still seeing organizations find this as a critical means of retaining staff and also incenting individuals to join their organization. So we haven't seen any movement or decline in the use of equity compensation. But with respect to mobility in particular, one of the questions we hear a lot is, how do we handle equity compensation when someone might go onto assignment? Is that equity compensation going to be deemed employment income? That is also covered by the tax reimbursement policies. And 83% of the organizations surveyed say yes, they cover it. So it is part of the package. It should be part of that initial conversation that you're having when someone's moving to make sure they understand how it's going to be handled. The other piece that goes along with that was with respect to tax equalization. So if we say that they are covered by the policy, how are we going to do it? So as many of you know, if you deal with equity compensation, if you have a restricted stock unit, for example, it might vest over a period of time. Or if you have a stock option, a lot of times they can stay alive for 10 years, right? So someone could go on multiple assignments or go back to their home country before they even have a taxable event. And so how do we apply that kind of tax equalization or reimbursement policy? And so another point that came out of the survey is that 72% of the companies that participated will keep someone equalized for the full term of the award. So if you think about what I just said, that could be a lot of additional administration, right? And particularly if you have that stock option in that 10-year period, but they want to make sure that people are not negatively impacted by having equity while on their assignment. 28% only do it through the data repatriation. So as long as you're on assignment, we'll give you some support, but once you come back, you're on your own. The other piece, which is always of interest to you because of the work that we do at Vialto Partners, is, are people understanding what the tax impacts are if they do have outstanding equity, right? So if I choose to go to another location, do I know that how that's going to impact me if I were to vest or exercise while I was there? And 72% of the companies, which I thought was a high number, but really great to hear, give their employees some guidance on what that could look like, what the impact would be, with only 28% saying no. And then the other piece that we thought was interesting that we just shared briefly with you all is just the use of third-party consultants, right? That's near and dear to our heart. And how are people using them when they have individuals on assignment or permanent transfers, and how are they handling them to deal with their equity compensation issues? And 67% of the individuals surveyed say they need support. And I think it just goes to how complex this issue is and why it's so great to have seminars like we are today to really learn more about it, with only a very small percentage either pushing to their local payrolls for the information and or trying to do it themselves. So I think a lot of good information there. And then the final thing I will say, not as specific around global mobility, but just around the use of equity in general, is just how important proactive communications are. That's something that we've seen ebbed and flowed over the years, particularly for some mature organizations. But the survey did reiterate people are re-looking at that. I think the change in work environment over the past 3 years has made it more important to have frequent communications to make sure people are aligned and also have a good understanding of what their equity plan brings. So hopefully that's of some use to the audience, and hopefully you all stay tuned for the release of the executive summary, because I do think there's some really good information in there.
That's fascinating information. And how can people get hold of the executive summary or the survey report?
Yeah, the Vialto is also going to be publicizing it, but if you go to www.globalequity.org, the executive summary should be there in a few days.
Cool. Okay, so that's one to watch out for.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure if anybody's got any further questions, I'm sure they can message you, Amy Lynn, or you, Julie, and you'll put them in contact with the right people. So thank you so much to Amy Lynn Flood and to Julie Barron for that wonderful update on equity and mobility. We're now going to say goodbye to you two, and we're going to bring on to our stage our very own producer, Tally. So everybody, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit hit the applause button as we say a big thank you and goodbye to Julie Barron and to Amy Lynn. So we've said goodbye to them, and we're going to bring onto the stage, of course, our wonderful producer, Tally.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Brian. Okay, so before I move to today's show, I wanted to say that last week we had a wonderful show with Sue, and we ended it up with a call to action, which I'm expecting you, Brian, to end this show with a call to action too. So if anyone wants to read the action points that Sue Kokeda gave us to do in order to promote diversity and mobility, please read the post that I wrote right immediately after the show. It was advertised on the Benevo page, and I will do the same after today. So how did today's show come up? How did the idea come? So if you all remember, we had our top 100 diversity champions, and please do go to the page of the new diversity champions and congratulate them. I'm going to send the link to that page. But on this page, you can also see the nominations, who nominated, who actually wanted to be shown as a nominator for each one of the champions. And for this week, we invited Suzie Chapman, and we had two reasons for that. One is that Suzie got 6 nominations. You can actually see only 3 of them here because 3 other chose to remain anonymous, but she got 6 different nominations to the top 100 diversity champions. But one nomination, and that's from Brendan Tabassi, was especially special because he sent us a wonderful email in which he told us a lot about Suzie and about her life in global mobility. And he nominated her, but he also wanted to make sure that we hear her story. So we couldn't, we had to hear it firsthand, and we really wanted you to hear it too. And that's how Suzie came to this show.
And we certainly will be hearing Suzie's story. In fact, in just a few seconds, we're going to be getting into that. But
you should be asking her about Brendan Tabassi, because she has an interesting story about this connection there and the specialty about his business. Yeah,
will do. And if you're in the audience, Brandon, shout out to you for nominating Suzie to be on the show today. And also, if in the audience you've got someone who you think would be a really great guest on the show, they've got a great story to tell in their work life, in their personal life, in any other way that you think they'll be a great guest, do send a message through to Tally, because we're always on the lookout for people to bring onto the show. Anyway, without further ado, let's move on. So we'll say a big thank you to Tally. We're going to welcome to the stage the wonderful Suzie Chapman. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let us welcome to our stage Suzie Chapman. Hey, Suzie, welcome to the show. Well,
hi, thank you so much. It's fun to be here. It's fun to watch that video with pictures of my family. So thank you for that.
And where are you joining us from today?
I am sitting in Johnston, Rhode Island, in my office.
Cool, nice. And you work for FM Global, which, tell us a bit about the company, because I know they're huge, but not everybody necessarily knows them. So tell us a bit about FM Global.
Sure. So we're not huge. We're small but mighty. We are a 187-year-old commercial property insurance company. We're in 42 countries around the world, but we have clients in over 145. And we have a deeply employee-centric business model and deeply employee-centric mobility model.
Okay. So you've been around, not you, but the company's been around for the best part of 200 years, 180 something years. Yep. So pretty established company. But I want to talk, we might get more onto the company later on, but I want to talk about you, and I want to get onto this whole intersection between mobility and diversity. Let's just start off talking about you, Suzie. Now, you said that when we were chatting earlier, you said that you had a hippie childhood, and you showed us I think that opening picture in that video was of your parents. So tell us a bit about your childhood growing up.
Sure, thank you. So I grew up in New York City, which of course in and of itself is an adventure different from that many others get to enjoy. My parents were hippies, but when I say that, what I mean is they believed in the ideals and the philosophies of the hippie movement. The hippie movement coming out of, here in the US, certainly the activities of 20, 30, 40 years before the hippie movement became so prevalent. So the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Jim Crow South, segregation, and the Voting Rights Act, the movement to help to create more balance with the voices of all Americans in our election system.
Okay, so they were very sort of anti-establishment, very sort of progressive.
Sure.
So were they going on marches and demonstrations, pushing you in the pram or in the sling when you were a kid?
No, well, sort of. So my sister and I, we used to ride around in the back of their VW van. And so those of you that know what the world looked like in the 70s, if you had a VW van, they had the seats pulled out and a mattress in the back, and we'd go on road trip adventures. We did not participate in many of those activities. My stepdad, though, I'm incredibly proud to say, helped to register voters in the 60s. He was a student at Yale University, and he was a part of the SNCC organization, Student Nonviolent Program, and he got to meet John Lewis, who hopefully many of you know. John Lewis is one of the greatest, most influential voices in the equity argument and certainly for voting rights in the US. He marched on Washington. He unfortunately has a scar on his head from getting hit with a club from a police officer, but he is proud to show his engagement and involvement in social activism. And that
I've got to tell you, LinkedIn is going mad at the moment. All the green applauses and the hearts going up there. Yeah. So sorry, I interrupted. Tell us a bit. Carry on telling us. Keep telling us.
Where I was, Brian, sorry, is my family were committed to the concepts of social activism and, of course, the concepts of that hippie movement, which if you looked at it over history, there's a tie to some of the philosophies and ideals of the movement being really closely aligned to Buddhism. And so if you meet my dad today and you have a conversation about religion with him, while we were raised Jewish and he was raised in a more strict Jewish household, his personal belief system is very similar to that of the Buddhists. Okay. And really it's just about we want what's right for all.
Okay, so these are like the fundamentals of diversity before diversity was even a word that anybody talked about. I mean, it just wasn't a phrase that people used back in those days. But let's fast forward now and fast forward to your life. So you come from a family that is diverse, and it doesn't matter which lens of diversity you use. You seem to tick all the boxes of diversity, which is not surprising you got voted by so many people to be a diverse champion. So tell us a bit about your family and the diverse nature of your blended family.
Sure. So I am in an interracial marriage. It's my second marriage, both of which were interracial. From my first marriage, I have a biracial child, a daughter who tomorrow is her birthday, and I can't wait to
what's her name? Shout out. What's her name?
Ariana, my daughter Ariana. Her husband is her husband's taking her to Disneyland for her birthday. So come on. My husband has 3 children from his first marriage, and they live in Atlanta and New York. And in the blend of our family, we talked about my daughter and his 3 children. His middle child is gay. And so we look at just from that perspective, my family is racially diverse, and we have proud representation from the LGBTQ community. And just, Brian, you and I didn't talk about this either, but my husband was raised in a very Christian household. His father was a minister. And so his family and my family coming together represents some additional diversity that we're proud to enjoy and have many discussions about.
So what's the secret of blending a family so successfully?
I think I'd love to know what the secret is, because I don't know that we've done it that successfully. But I think our philosophies, my husband and I, is we keep the ears open and sometimes keep the mouths closed and learn from each other so that we can support each other in who we are individually.
Okay. And you've also got grandkids where
Yep.
They're also diverse as well. So tell us about the next generation down.
My husband has a child with two babies, two beautiful girls, one of whom was in that walk-up video. And my daughter has two boys, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, the older of whom has self-identified as non-binary. And the younger, the joke with my younger grandson is he self-identifies with all pronouns and wants to be a part of everything.
Okay, so one of them is identifying with all pronouns,
Yes.
and the other one, what pronouns? That's a 7-year-old. I mean, do 7-year-olds even talk in terms of pronouns? I mean,
Yeah.
They probably just got to that age of understanding the concept of pronouns. So, what pronouns do they use?
They use they, them. And actually, it came about through a beautiful thing. My daughter, and we talked about this a bit earlier, my daughter is she's my role model in terms of what a wonderful mom she is, really allowing for her children to have open conversations and, feel who they are authentically and embrace who they are authentically. But the pronouns came out of my daughter was completing forms for my grandson to go to the dentist. And they live just outside of Seattle, Washington. Seattle is an extremely progressive city. It's a great place to live when you have a desire to live with like-minded people and you are more progressive yourself. So the dental form asked what the child's pronouns were. So my daughter asked Isaac what their pronouns were, and she tells the story that it was like a light bulb went off for him, being able to say, "I'm no longer he, him. I am now they, them."
Okay, and so that's just amazing stuff, and it's great that that she's raising them on such a sort of progressive perspective. But let's bring the conversation into mobility, because you've moved. I think you were telling me you've relocated 8 times during your career. Now, relocation is always traumatic for everybody, no matter how straightforward the move. It's not evil. But when you're doing that and you're with a blended family, and you're blended from a religious perspective, from a racial perspective, from a orientation perspective, I mean, it doesn't matter what lens. What are some of the thoughts and challenges that you were thinking about when you were relocating with diversity in mind?
Sure. So my very first move was from New York City to Norwalk, Connecticut. At the time, I was a single mom. And so the sort of imperative in my move was making sure I was putting my daughter into an environment where she could be enabled and successful, even where I might not always be able to be there, because of course I was also a working mom. The relocation was chosen in part because it brought me closer to my family, which helped me to expand her community. But I have to tell you, Brian, all the times we've moved, it should be embarrassing for me to say, having been in this industry for a couple decades, that it's taken me really until this last move to get it right, meaning I got it wrong a lot. When we move, we should be thinking about how we as a family unit are received in the community that we go to, meaning we should also be looking for a community that would receive us well. It's important for all of us to look around and see people that look like us or are open to who we are and want to engage with who we are, may share some of our beliefs. And in the United States, there's an element of that really depends on the safety of your family. So moving a multiracial family, moving family members that self-identify as LGBTQ, if you do it wrong, again, especially here right now, you can put yourself at risk or your family at risk. And so this last move, and this is where Brandon Tabasi and I connected, this last move, I was incredibly purposeful about looking for a community that would receive my family, where I knew that we could create connections and have a community, and also where I knew we could be safe.
So did that mean you'd rule out certain jobs because you didn't want to go to that part of the country or the world?
Yes. In fact, I've had an experience where I was offered an international permanent transfer. And during the course of the interview through to the job offer, the location the job was going to be was in a location that would work for my family. And after the job offer was extended, the location of the job was changed to an area that was less conducive to my unique family unit, and I had to decline the offer after accepting it. So it's that real, and it's that much of an imperative when I think about who we are and what we need.
Okay, because presumably, you know, you're sometimes walking into places and people will be perceiving you as a white woman, and your husband walks in and has got a completely different lived experience. And are you finding that gets difficult in certain locations? And how much of an issue has that been in determining your moves?
I have found that the makeup of the larger family has created difficulties in certain locations. So I think it was my second relocation. We landed in northern Fairfield County, Connecticut, in a small town. My daughter at the time was in elementary school, and her father's Puerto Rican, so her biracial makeup is Puerto Rican and Caucasian. And part of why that's important is in the wintertime, she would, using the phrase that is commonly used in this space, pass. So other children in school thought she was white. And as the seasons changed and she got more outside time as a soccer player, her skin color would change. She'd get beautiful tan. I often refer to her as cappuccino. She looked lovely. And she would lose friendships. And actually, when she was in second grade, she came home from school one day and said, "Mom, who is the KKK and why would they be out to get me?" And it was a shocking moment, not ever having thought that I would hear that kind of a question at the time that we were in, but it reflected the community and some of my need to prepare to protect my daughter.
Yeah, and there's a comment that's come in from my colleague Nitsan Udan, which I'll just pull up on screen if I might. He says, "Fantastic insights, but how do you find out which communities are more inclusive?"
I used to work with a woman at Serva who said, again, here in the United States, only relocate during election season so you can see what kinds of signs people put on their lawns, which presidential or gubernatorial candidate they're supporting. But of course, it's a lot more complicated than that. You can Google almost anything. When we chose to relocate here, we Googled information about the demographic makeup of our community. We Googled information about political beliefs and how this community, this area tends to vote. We drove around town. And so it's not terribly scientific. So I'm sorry, Nitsan, but it's a lot of data gathering and also using your eyes and ears to understand where you're landing.
Okay. And what about choice of suppliers? Obviously, you know, we're all in the industry. So, you know, whilst you're relocating personally, we also advise other people. I mean, how do you select suppliers that you think are going to be most, I don't know what the right phrase is, simpatico to, you know, the needs and desires of the people who you're moving?
Sure. So, you know, there's layers of that within our industry, going through the RMC space, as well as through the third-party supplier space. And then there's other items like technology platforms, et cetera. I think the first thing that anybody should do who's in a position to make those decisions is take some time to educate yourself. I can speak to this very much through the lens of the US supplier network, a little bit less outside of the US. But there's a couple of things that I provided insights to while I was working at Serva and now look for here on the corporate side, which is looking for representation across multiple communities and groups within the suppliers that you select, asking your RMC to provide suppliers that are minority, women, veteran-owned small businesses or LGBTQ plus owned, and then leaning into that and holding the RMC accountable to direct some of that third-party activity through to those vendor partners that are certified as in those categories that I referenced. So I made a comment earlier as to my connection with Brandon Tabasi. When I made this particular relocation from Northern Virginia to Rhode Island for my current role, I asked Serva to be very specific in choosing vendor partners for me that were in this category, in one of these categories. My realtor on departure, an incredible, strong realtor by the name of John Mentis. He's with Long & Foster. Long & Foster is not diverse owned, but John Mentis represents diversity, helped us with the home sale. Executive class helped us with the moving. They are veteran owned. Go Destination Services is the FM Global selected partner for destination globally. They are minority and veteran owned. And Brandon Tabasi has a real estate firm in Massachusetts, supporting Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And he is NGLCC certified, which is the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. And he's one of a very small number of companies certified with the NGLCC in this global mobility space. But he helped me find my home and make my purchase. So I went across a spectrum, Brian, of directing the suppliers, looking at the suppliers and looking for people that represent multiple diversity, and then also live your commitment and choose to use vendors that support that commitment to this field. Okay, so there are ways that you can be certified. Yeah. So obviously there's women-owned businesses. In the US, I think you said there's the NGLCC. Letters, Chambers of them. There's the NGLCC. There's I think in the UK there's something similar called Pride 365. Yeah. So I mean, I think there are ways of being certified. So I mean, but how many companies do you think in our industry are actually certified? Not nearly enough. And there's a little bit of a dependency on where you are. In some countries around the world, there is not the availability to be certified, but you still can self-identify with the RMC as, you know, your ownership and representation from your community. Here in the US, there are a number of organizations that certify minority, veteran, women-owned, et cetera. The certification process, I think almost anywhere you are where it's offered, is a bit labor intensive, administrative. The cost is not astronomical. In the US, it's, you know, certainly less than $1,000 per register or certification. The challenge though more is going through the paperwork. And I will say, I'll do a shout out for Serva, that they offer a number of their vendors the opportunity to get on a list, and they will help to do that certification, which is a program that I was a part of while I was still there. Companies are asking vendors to spend their money in conscientious ways. And so when we're asking our vendors to be conscientious with our spend, part of the goal there is to help to broaden that pool of third-party providers that do represent this space, and enable them to get bigger share of wallet, better support, financial support through that certification process. Okay, so I suppose one clear message out there to people in the industry is, if they want to get on your RFP tender list or companies like yours, then if they've got a flag that they can fly that shows that they are a diverse business or a diversity ally or champion, then it's worth actually taking the steps to get whatever the relevant certification or certificate. So you'd encourage people to go out and get themselves certified in whichever way they can. I would. I recognize many of the reasons why it can be cumbersome and labor intensive or potentially scary to embrace the community that you're from, for fear that it may cause a lack of opportunity. In the US, again, and I'm sorry to be so US-centric, I'm typically not, there's also government programs that help to provide support for certified small businesses, so it's worth it. That said, many people out in the global mobility industry, certainly in the corporate space, have a lot of room for education to learn about each of these communities and what vendor partners are a part of them. And it's the way to do it, is to tell them, to teach them, teach us.
When we were chatting earlier, you came up with an amazing statistic about landslides in presidential elections and the impact that was having on the way the fact that links to the way communities are. Just share that statistic with the audience.
So the statistic is comparing the 1976 US presidential election to the 2016 election. In 1976, more than 75% of reporting counties gave neither presidential candidate a landslide victory. And you could infer from that that means that at the time we lived in communities with people that held different ideals and beliefs and philosophies. We were diverse in our communities. In the 2016 election, over 80% of reporting counties gave either one candidate or the other a landslide victory. So in the intervening years, we became a people that wanted to live more and more with people that think like we do. And I do it too. It's, it's the sort of the nature of where we are in the development of our society right now. But if you think about that little piece of information, part of why that stood out to me when I read it is in mobility, every time we pick somebody up out of the community that's their home and put them somewhere else, we are creating a diversity event. And our opportunity is to do that with intentional focus on inclusivity to support the employee in being successful while still leaning into the diversity that we create.
Okay, because Tom Brune put a comment up here, and I think what he was saying towards the end is, I believe most people would agree what we've seen is 2 steps forward, 1 step back phenomenon. Is that something that you would agree with? Have we, obviously we've made a lot of progress, but have we also lost a bit of diversity from the point you're saying that we're all living in our own little sort of insular communities?
Yeah. So there is a statement, a saying out there that says, and this is specific to race, but it applies across. Every time we have material racial progress, we see equal and opposite racist progress. And I call that out specifically to say, and Tom, I won't get into politics, but if you look at 8 years of President Barack Obama and then 4 years of President Donald Trump, we had the racial progress under Obama's administration, followed by an equal and opposite reaction.
Okay, there's a lovely comment coming here from Radar. I'm just going to put that up there. I have to admit, I missed the votes. This is about our top 100 champions. But I would definitely have given my vote to Suzie. She embodies D&I in everything she does, and wherever she has the opportunity, she champions these initiatives. I experienced that as a relocating employee as well as a corporate client. So lovely, lovely endorsement then from Radar. So Suzie, maybe let's move the conversation forward a bit and say, well, and I promised Tally in her bit that we would talk about not just the issues and challenges, but actually what we can do, because we call this show a call to action. Yeah. So what can we actually do to make things, to make the world better in our own little way in mobility? What are the action steps that we could be working on?
So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. We talked about my family, and my family creates who I am, right? It informs a lot of where I come from. Where I come from informs who I am. But I had a moment. Everybody around the world watched the murder of George Floyd back on May 25th of 2020. And for me, that was my moment. That was my day, my personal call to action, where I made a decision that not investing in my education in this area and not committing myself to this space professionally was no longer acceptable to me. So the first thing I did was I committed to my personal education, and that's a huge call to action. Take the time to learn. There's books, there's TED Talks, there's podcasts, there's me, there's people like me. There are tremendous resources in this industry that I'd happily point people to. Valencia Culbreth from Grable, Emma Dodson-Groves from Serva, really strong leaders in this space that can help to provide support. And then speak to your individual community. Know that individuals who have experienced bias may not want to take on the task of teaching, but when they do, stop and listen and learn and take the opportunity. Each of us represents diversity, but when I walk around the city, when I walk around the streets at night, I put my diversity in my pocket. Others are not able to do that, and let's learn from them. And then bring it to work and make a decision on your personal commitment. And if your commitment is such that you want to bring this into your program, as mobility leaders, we've got two places where we can influence this. One is internally within our organization, making sure that our program does represent diversity, that we've got opportunities for all. One thing we talked about, Brian, is things like women and family members, women with complicated family members like mine, not always being offered the opportunity to relocate, and relocate them and make the program work for them, make the program work for all. And then the other side is looking outside. Sorry, Brian, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, you're talking, it's slightly on a tangent there, and I want to get back to what you're saying,
Sure.
but I was just wondering that sometimes, of course, the issue is not just people feeling uncomfortable, but people self-selecting out and not even exploring the possibility because they think they might feel uncomfortable before they've actually done their research.
Right. Yeah. So again, it's that two-sided coin. Some women may say, I can't relocate. I have small children. I've got complicated family members. I've got, things that I have to worry about and think about and be mindful of as it relates to my family. People have moved all around the world since the dawn of time. Your relocation partners can help you get that done and work with you for your unique individual family requirements, whether it be education, sports, medical support, or the diverse makeup of your family. Let your relocation partners help you do that. And then the other thing is educating the business so the business knows that we can do it. We can do it for everybody. So educate the business so they don't demonstrate bias by forgetting to include all people that are qualified for a role in that relocation opportunity.
Okay, so we talked a little bit there about education internally. We talked a bit about working with your suppliers, and I put up here, know your supply chain. How would you do that in practice? What steps will you be taking with your supply chain? So, comment here from Melissa. She says, we all need to take a page from Suzie's handbook. Sitting back quietly is no longer an option. With you there, 1000%, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's work on that. Okay, what are we all going to do? So let's talk about the supply chain. How are we going to work with our supply chain to make sure we're getting to the right solutions?
So first of all, I think we all have a duty of care responsibility to know our supply chain, regardless of the size of the program. We want to make sure that our employees are being tended to through that, sort of carrying the stewardship we have for our employees to make sure that the supply chain has that as top of mind. So you must get to know them. And if this diversity is, as it should be, an imperative for you, understand the diverse makeup of your suppliers. And it goes beyond, I talked about Go Destination Services, for example, as a minority veteran-owned DSP, but the owner of the company isn't out meeting with my employees when they're on the ground looking for communities to live in.
Is that John? Is that
John Merriweather.
John Merriweather. Okay, shout out to John Merriweather.
Yeah, big shout out to John Merriweather. What John does is make sure that there are choices on the ground for my employees to work with. And I may offer my employees the choice of which consultant they want to work with so that they can find somebody that they feel will really have their personal unique interests in mind as they help them through the process of acclimating to a new community. So it's at the big level and understand the ownership of your supply chain and their value proposition, but then also getting down to where you can, based on the size of your program, who's really on the ground.
Yeah, one of the things, tech has got a role to play in this too. I mean, certainly I look at it from a Benevo perspective, and we have diversity dashboards in our reporting, and that should allow you, or does allow you as a Benevo client, to actually look at your suppliers and look at your actual assignees as well, and to monitor diversity through whichever lens you want and are able to collect the data. But it's all about measuring it so that you know to what extent there's anything that that needs to be handled. So Elizabeth Prenz, a shout out to Elizabeth as well. Oh, shouting out to everybody today. And love John Merriweather, shout out to John too. Two of the best there together.
Yeah.
So we talked about education, we talked about knowing your supply chain, we talked a bit about tech, and something we touched on earlier is even within the supplier, find providers who are simpatico. So even if the business itself isn't, it isn't owned by, say, LGBT certified or women certified, find people in the business that actually align with the values of the people not just your own values, but the people you're trying to move. Is that a fair way of summing it up?
It is. There's a bit of a tender piece to this that I just want to call attention to, which is I scream my allyship from the rooftops because it's the choice that I've made, and it also suits my personality. And I look for partners and friends that will happily scream their allyship from the rooftops as well. But the other side of it is also being mindful that people's diversity is personal, and we have to recognize and respect that personal aspect. And not all people want to scream their allyship from the rooftop. And some people, in fact, have experiences doing that have created harm. So understanding and recognizing the balance. And when we look for folks that are simpatico, we also want to look for people that have that empathy. And I know it's a bit of a passé phrase, but the emotional intelligence to be able to adjust accordingly based on the human beings that we're taking care of every day.
Okay. And what advice would you give to suppliers?
For suppliers, I think there's a couple of pieces to this. The first piece, we talked a bit about, my friend Adam from Move for Hunger uses the phrase, doing good is good for business. And doing good in this space is particularly good for business.
Adam Lowy at Move for Hunger, even bigger shout for you.
So in the spirit of Pride Month, and I make my comment about being tender here on purpose as well, because of course we don't want to fall victim to rainbow washing and only celebrating our LGBTQ plus partners in June. But I pulled a quick stat earlier that here in the US, the LGBTQ plus community represents $1.7 trillion worth of economic spend. Doing good is good for business. Support all communities, give everybody a chance to feel simpatico with us, and generate the revenue in the economy that supports this industry.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time, and I'm going to bring our other colleagues on in a second, just as we close up. But as you talked about Adam's phrase of doing good is good for business, the other phrase that you talked about, which I'd just like to say, like a 30 seconds on as we get to the end of the hour, is you simply said it's personal.
It's personal.
Yeah.
It's personal. So sure, who we are as diverse individuals, I guarantee you we are all diverse. My diversity is not as evident at all times. I put a lot of it in my pocket, as noted. I put it in my pocket because it's about my family. And everything is a bit more tender when it's about my family. Your diversity may be about your medical status. It may be about your religious beliefs. It may be about the location where you were raised. It's personal. And sharing diversity is something that's personal. But for all of us, creating a safe space where we express empathy enables the people that we're supporting to be supported, to be taken care of through the process, irrespective of their desire to express their personal diversity.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Suzie. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. I'm going to bring back Tally and Julia. Julie and Amy Lynn had to drop for client meetings, but everybody in the audience, I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed presenting it today. It's been absolutely fantastic to meet with the wonderful, wonderful Suzie Chapman, and indeed to help you celebrate diversity, and in particular Pride Month, that's obviously this month. So thank you, everybody. As Tom said, thank you, Suzie and Brian. After last week, these diversity websites have been on a major role for the month of June. And yeah, and if anybody didn't catch the show last week with Sue Kukadia, that was one of the best. It was truly, truly inspirational. If you haven't seen it, do watch it on catch up. Anyway, that's it. We're done for another week. We are back again this time next week on a very different subject. We're going to be talking about data privacy and the brave new world of mobility in the 21st century. And we'll be answering that question: how many people have access to your personal information when you relocate from one country to another? And trust me, you will be shocked when we tell you the answer. So if you want to find out the answer, join us next week. Take care, everybody, and have a great week. Ta-ra.